Ever feel like you're supposed to have it all figured out by like age 20?
Yeah.
Pick one thing, be the best, and never look back.
Uh,
Today we're diving into Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World, a book by David Epstein
Right.
that throws that whole idea out the window.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah,
It challenges a lot of what, many of us have been told.
for sure.
Epstein argues that in this world that we live in, that's
Mhm.
constantly changing, getting more complex,
Yeah.
it's often the people who have a range of interests and experiences, the generalists, who are better at adapting and solving problems in unexpected ways.
So not like the person who's been laser focused on one thing since they were 5.
Not necessarily. Epstein actually uses this story of Laszlo Polgar.
Okay.
He decided to raise his daughters to be chess prodigies,
Wow.
and they achieved incredible success in the very specialized world of chess.
Yeah.
But their story also shows us, I think, the potential downsides
Okay.
of specializing too early,
Gotcha.
especially, when you're dealing with situations that are less structured than a chessboard.
So maybe specializing early works great for chess.
Right.
But what about, like, I don't know, firefighting?
Oh, that's a perfect example.
Okay.
Epstein talks about what he calls kind learning environments.
Right.
Things like chess or golf, where the rules are really clear, the patterns repeat,
Okay.
and you get immediate feedback on your actions.
Interesting.
Those are areas where, specializing early can give you a real edge.
Like Tiger Woods spending his childhood on the golf course?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so that makes sense.
Yeah.
But firefighters,
Yeah.
they face all kinds of stuff.
Right.
It's constantly changing, unpredictable.
Absolutely. And Epstein calls those wicked learning environments.
Okay.
Think about experienced firefighters suddenly having to fight a fire in a skyscraper. Years of experience with house fires might not translate.
Oh, wow.
And their ingrained habits could even lead to, bad decisions.
So it seems like focusing early makes sense when the rules are clear.
Right.
But in unpredictable fields,
Yeah.
a broader skill set
Yeah.
might be more valuable.
You got it.
This is already making me rethink my whole life plan, but okay.
It's pretty thought-provoking stuff.
Let's keep going. Epstein also talks about this thing called the Flynn effect.
Right. The Flynn effect.
Yeah.
It's this observation that IQ scores have been steadily rising over the past century.
Really?
And it's not that people are getting inherently smarter.
Yeah.
It's more like our minds are adapting to a world that increasingly demands abstract conceptual thinking.
So it's less about knowing a ton of facts and more about being able to think critically, solve problems.
Exactly. And, Epstein talks about this study done by Alexander Luria
Okay.
on villagers in Uzbekistan.
Interesting.
The villagers were really skilled
Yeah.
at solving practical problems based on their direct experience,
Okay.
but they struggled with abstract reasoning. It's almost like they were, highly specialized for their specific environment,
I see.
but lacked the flexibility to adapt to new situations.
So like if you took those villagers out of their village
Right.
and dropped them into a modern city, they'd
Exactly.
be totally lost.
That's the idea. And, this really highlights the need, I think, for education systems
Okay.
that focus on developing broad conceptual skills, not just narrow specialization.
Right.
We need people who can think critically, adapt to new information,
Yeah.
and make connections across different fields.
So speaking of making connections, let's talk about the Fili do Coro.
Okay.
This amazing orchestra made up of Venetian orphans.
Right.
They were trained to play multiple instruments,
Yeah.
which seems kind of unusual in the world of classical music.
Yeah, it is. And yet, research shows that this kind of diverse training can actually benefit even classical musicians.
Wow.
It really challenges the idea that early specialization is the only way to achieve mastery. Take Django Reinhardt, the legendary jazz guitarist.
Okay.
He couldn't even read music.
Really?
He became incredibly influential through an unconventional and experimental approach.
So even in a field like classical music, where
Right.
you'd think specialization is key,
Yeah.
there's value in exploring different instruments,
Like,
approaches.
It's all about cultivating range, being open to new experiences
Yeah.
and ways of thinking.
Awesome.
And that's what we're going to explore further as we continue our deep dive into range.
One thing that really surprised me in Range was this idea that more experience doesn't always equal better decision-making.
Yeah, it's kind of counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
We tend to think that the longer someone's been doing something,
Right.
the better they must be at it.
Yeah.
But Epstein presents some really compelling research that challenges that assumption.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, there's research showing people who switch careers often end up happier and more successful in the long run.
Interesting.
Even if they initially, take a hit in terms of skills, it's almost like taking a step back allows them to eventually leap forward.
So maybe all those career changes I've been considering aren't so crazy after all.
Maybe not. Epstein also highlights this work by economist Stephen Levitt.
Okay.
He found that people who literally flipped a coin to decide whether to make a big life change, like quitting their job, were actually happier 6 months later.
Interesting.
If the coin landed on heads and they made the change.
That's so wild. So maybe our fear of the unknown, of leaving what's familiar, is sometimes what holds us back from finding something better?
It seems that way.
Yeah.
Epstein talks about the importance of what he calls short-term planning, of trying out different possible selves.
Interesting.
Through things like internships, projects, volunteer work.
Okay.
This allows you to get real-world experience and figure out what truly aligns with your interests and abilities.
It's like test driving different cars before you buy one.
Exactly.
Make sure it's the right fit for you.
You got it. And speaking of finding the right fit, Epstein also talks about the importance of making connections and learning.
Okay.
He uses this example of math class, where students often focus on, memorizing procedures instead of understanding the underlying concepts.
Oh, I can definitely relate to that. I was always better at memorizing formulas than actually understanding what they meant.
Exactly. And Epstein contrasts that with what he calls making connections problems.
Okay.
Where students are challenged to apply concepts in new and creative ways.
So it's more about problem solving.
Yes, exactly. And this type of learning is more challenging up front.
Yeah.
But it leads to a deeper understanding.
Okay.
And better long-term retention.
So it's like the difference between memorizing a recipe and understanding the chemistry behind how the ingredients interact.
You got it. And this idea of desirable difficulties, of embracing challenges that force you to think critically and make connections, applies, far beyond the classroom.
Right.
It's relevant to any field where you're trying to, learn and grow.
Okay, let's just switch gears a bit and talk about this idea of dropping your familiar tools.
Okay.
It sounds kind of drastic, but Epstein uses this metaphor to illustrate the importance of, being able to unlearn and adapt in the face of new challenges.
He draws on research by Carl Weick about, experienced firefighters who sometimes make poor decisions when faced with a skyscraper fire. Their years of experience fighting house fires, their familiar tools may not apply in this new situation. And their ingrained patterns of thinking could lead them astray.
So sometimes our greatest strengths can become weaknesses if we hold on to them too tightly and don't adapt to the situation.
Exactly. And this connects back to, the Challenger disaster.
Oh, wow,
where NASA's rigid adherence to establish procedures, their reluctance to drop their tools contributed to the tragedy.
That's a powerful reminder that even in fields known for their rigorous approach to problem solving, there's a danger in becoming too reliant on established procedures.
Especially when faced with novel and complex challenges.
Right.
It seems like being able to question assumptions and be open to new information is crucial, even when you're an expert.
For sure, for sure. This reminds me of the section in the book about super forecasters.
Okay.
Who are they and what makes them so good at predicting the future?
So super forecasters are individuals who consistently make more accurate predictions about future events than experts in their respective fields.
Wow.
And what's interesting is they often have a wide range of interests. They're voracious readers, and they're incredibly good at synthesizing information from diverse sources.
So they're not necessarily specialists in the areas they're forecasting.
Exactly. They excel because they approach problems with what's called a fox-like mindset, which is characterized by intellectual curiosity, open-mindedness, and a willingness to change their minds based on new information.
So they're like the ultimate generalists.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
Interesting. So in a world that often seems to value specialization above all else, these super forecasters show that a broad perspective and a willingness to learn from different sources can be a real advantage.
Absolutely. Their success challenges this idea that deep expertise in a narrow field is always the key to making accurate judgments.
Right.
In fact, in complex and unpredictable situations, it's often the ability to think broadly, connect the dots, and consider multiple perspectives that makes a real difference.
This makes me think of the story about Jill Viles.
Oh, yes.
The woman who made this groundbreaking medical discovery. Not because she was a doctor or scientist, but because she had this curiosity and persistence to connect seemingly unrelated pieces of information.
Jill had this rare muscle disease.
Okay.
And became fascinated by the story of Priscilla, a world champion bodybuilder with incredible strength.
Okay.
Jill noticed these striking similarities between their physiques, despite their very different conditions.
Interesting.
She saw a pattern that no one else had picked up on.
It's like she was able to see the forest for the trees, connecting her own personal experience with this seemingly unrelated case.
And this led her to make this groundbreaking connection between a rare muscle disease and a condition that causes muscle overgrowth.
Interesting.
This discovery, which could lead to new treatments for muscle disorders, wouldn't have happened if Jill hadn't been willing to think outside the traditional boundaries of her own condition.
That's a really inspiring story. It shows that anyone, regardless of their background or expertise, can make a significant contribution if they're willing to be curious, make connections, and challenge conventional thinking.
It's a great example of how a generalist mindset can lead to breakthroughs. Now, before we move on, I do want to emphasize that range isn't saying that specialization is bad. It's more about recognizing that in a world that increasingly values, adaptability and innovation, cultivating a broad range of experiences can be incredibly valuable.
It's about finding that sweet spot between depth and breadth, between mastering a specific skill set and developing the mental agility to apply that knowledge in new and unexpected ways. Kind of like Gunpei Yokoi, the creator of the Game Boy. And his idea of lateral thinking with withered technology.
Let's dive into that.
So withered technology, it sounds a little bit like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It does have a, it does, but it's actually a really fascinating concept. Yokoi basically decided to use older, less sophisticated technology for the Game Boy. At a time when, the gaming industry was obsessed with the latest and greatest graphics, processing power, all that.
So he kind of went totally against the grain. Kind of like choosing, I don't know, a flip phone in the age of smartphones.
Yes, exactly.
And
it turned out to be, a brilliant move.
Yeah.
The Game Boy simplicity made it affordable, accessible. Plus, its long battery life was perfect for playing on the go.
And those games, Tetris, Pokemon, we spent hours glued to those tiny screens.
Addictive, weren't they?
Totally.
So Yokoi's story, I think, is a great example of what we call lateral thinking, approaching a problem from a different angle. Finding creative solutions that others might miss. It's about challenging assumptions, seeing limitations as opportunities.
This reminds me of that, what was it called? That ambiguous sorting task. That Epstein describes.
Where people have to sort cards. Not just based on how they look. But based on the kind of underlying principles. It's a really clever way to test someone's ability to see connections between things that seem totally different, To understand the deeper structure beneath the surface details.
And it turns out the people who are good at this, the ones who can make those conceptual leaps, are often the ones who come up with really innovative solutions.
They're the ones who can find inspiration in unexpected places. See patterns that others miss. And connect the dots in ways that, lead to breakthroughs.
So after this deep dive into range, what's the big takeaway for us?
Well,
how can we apply these ideas to our own lives?
That's the key question, right? One of the, I think, key things is to be open to exploring, experimenting.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to try new things.
Yep.
Even if they don't seem to fit perfectly into your, current career path or what you think you should be doing. Those diverse experiences can become really valuable assets down the line, helping you connect ideas in unexpected ways and adapt to new challenges.
It's like building up your own personal mental toolbox.
That's a great answer.
The more diverse your set of tools, the better equipped you'll be to handle whatever comes your way.
Absolutely. Another, I think, important point is to embrace short-term planning. Try out different possible selves, right?
Yeah.
Through internships, projects, volunteer work, all those things. It's a way to get real-world experience.
Yeah.
And figure out, what truly aligns with your interests and your abilities.
Like taking your career for a test drive before you commit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And finally, don't underestimate the power of self-reflection.
Okay.
Take the time to really think critically about your experiences.
Yeah.
Figure out your strengths, your weaknesses.
Right.
And be open to, changing direction based on what you discover.
It's about embracing the journey, trusting that your path, with all its twists and turns, will lead you where you're meant to be.
So as we wrap up our exploration of range, I want to leave you with this.
Yeah.
Could our obsession with finding our one true calling really early in life, with specializing too soon, actually be limiting our potential? Are we missing out on the creativity and innovation that come from embracing a wider range of experiences?
That's definitely something to think about. And if you're intrigued by these ideas, we highly recommend checking out Range by David Epstein.
Great book.
It's full of fascinating research and inspiring stories that will challenge your assumptions about success and achievement. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.